Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Noah Rothbaum, author of The Whiskey Bible. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you on this wonderful day.
I am prepared to answer all of the questions that you've always dreamed about asking about whiskey, bourbon, scotch, rye, single malt, whatever it is. I'm here for you to answer all.
Thank you for that. What I really want to know is how you became you. How did this nice Jewish boy end up with this subject matter?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I don't. My family are not huge whiskey drinkers. I mean, they certainly appreciate fine alcohol. My grandfather, in his living room always had a home bar with, at the time, Chivas Regal was, the kind of the fancy drink. So there's always a couple bottles. There's always a couple bottles of Moishi Shika, that liqueur that came in that fanciful bottle, which I'm not even sure what it exactly was, and then certainly like I think a bottle of Sabra, but it was more, those things seem to pick up more dust than anything. And to be honest, it was really started when I was in college. I did an internship at Food and Wine magazine. And at the time, the whiskey, industry was just kind of coming back alive after a couple of decades of really hard times when nobody wanted whiskey around the world. So it was kind of exciting um, to meet these people who were breathing new life into the whiskey industry and taste their whiskey. And it was kind of exciting and interesting. And as a writer and a journalist, it was something that I knew nobody else was really covering at the time. So I don't know. It sort of I fell into it, and it's become a real passion. And now several books into this, living in New York hasn't but several books into it, I mean, whiskey has sort of become my specialty, which is sort of amazing. And I really found out so much about it, including the fact that, like, in many ways, American Jews invented whiskey in this country, or at least helped popularize it, in the around the turn of the century, the late 1800s and 1900s.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I ever learned about in Hebrew school, certainly, right? Or we don't talk about at the synagogue while we're having Kiddush, and maybe we should, but in reality, Jews have always, because of the laws of kashrut, we've always had to make our own alcohol, right? So, in the old country, whether that be Poland or Russia or Germany, Jews were always making their own alcohol. And in some of those countries, like Poland, we were also making alcohol for non-Jews, for Gentiles as well. Like the Kingdom of Poland, at certain points, only Jews could make alcohol. And sort of these taverns or little inns doubled as distilleries. So, like a lot of immigrant networks, when Jews started coming to America in mass in the 1800s, they realized, wow, like all of this knowledge that we've had about making alcohol would come in really handy in both America and Canada, because these countries are thirsty and they need our help making alcohol. And suddenly, even though Jews represented a very small part of places like Louisville, Kentucky, they were overrepresented in the production of alcohol and whiskey. And we have folks, like I.W. Bernheim, who, his brand I.W. Harper, he gave it a very Gentile name, I think, in hopes that it would sell better. And it did. It became a fabulously large brand. And he and his brother had come from Germany. They were Jews. And then, later on, well, not much time later, the Brahmins come from Bessarabia to Canada, and they obviously start a liquor company that ultimately becomes Seagram's, which is, the first or second largest liquor company in America for a long time. And their main competitor was a company called Shenley, which was started by Louis Rosenstiel, who's also Jewish. the Blum family, Chicago, they were the main investors in Jim Beam after Prohibition. So when the Beam started up, the Blums and some other investors provided the money for them to reopen their distillery. And ultimately, the Blums bought out their other investors. So, Jim Beam was owned by the Blums really for decades. The Shapiro family of Kentucky, a similar story. They came from Lithuania. The original Max Shapiro was a peddler with a big, pack on his back, and he was selling all types of notions. And, ultimately that turned into a store, the Louisville store, and then a chain of stores. His five sons ran these stores. And after Prohibition, since they still had money, during the Great Depression, because as they like to say, people still needed a needle and a thread or a zipper or a button. They had the money, and some folks approached them about opening a distillery, and ultimately the Shapiros bought out their investors, and Heaven Hill is still going strong today. They make Elijah Craig and Evan Williams and Rittenhouse Rye, and a whole host of other whiskeys and other types of spirits. So it's kind of amazing when you really think about how many brands were started by Jews. Even Old Fitzgerald was started by a Jewish man in the 1800s. George Dickel, Emmanuel Schwab, at least started out as Jewish. Ultimately, he converted. But, so many of American whiskey brands were started by Jews or run by Jews, through the 20th century. It's incredible that we don't talk about this, and it's been so overlooked for so long.
I'm just like flabbergasted that all of these facts, just came spilling out of your mouth. You really are you are the walking, talking whiskey Bible. Yeah. Well, we associate wine,
But
right? Because we drink a lot. Holidays are very
sure,
important, but we really don't think about whiskey.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I think, I mean, my rule, I have this theory about alcohol where people made alcohol out of whatever was available, right? So whether that's grapes or grain or potatoes or old shoes, whatever it is, people are turning into alcohol. So that, like, when Jews lived in certain places, obviously, where grapes grow, in Israel and in other places, they made wine, right? But in places like, Eastern Europe, there's obviously wine grapes are much harder to come by. So we were making all types of alcohol. And the same thing is true here. I mean, fortunately, the rules for making spirits are a lot simpler than the rules for making wine. Like the wine rules are like quite complex. But the rules for making, whiskey, most whiskey by its very nature is kosher, right? There's nothing not kosher about it because there's only really three ingredients in making whiskey. It's water, yeast, and grain, right? And that's it. I mean, the fourth ingredient that I like to talk about is the barrel, because all whiskey comes off the still clear. The color and so much of the flavor comes from the barrel. So in America now, the federal regulations mean that straight bourbon and rye have to be aged in a new barrel, right? Which is great. But some people like to finish their whiskey in wine barrels, or, in Scotland, the Scots, they use, 100% malted barley, obviously still kosher, but like, they either use used American whiskey barrels or use sherry barrels, right? So barrels that have first held sherry. Some Jews believe that that's that's wine. Sherry is like a fortified wine, so that makes it not kosher. So there have been many debates, I think, at Kiddush clubs, in synagogues around the country about whether or not a sherry barrel makes your whiskey not kosher. But the closest reading I would say would be that it would not be kosher to use a whiskey that's been aged in a sherry oak, but stick to the ones, if you're concerned about it, that have been aged in American oak, used American oak. And to be honest, a number of brands have made it even simpler because they've gone ahead and gotten the Orthodox Union or the London Bet Din to give them the hechsher for their label. So folks like Glenmorangie, the original, proudly has the OU. William Grant for a number of their products, have the OU, and then Glen Rothes, I think, has the Bet Din's logo. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of amazing that we've come full circle, that she's helped build the whiskey industry, and finally, I think we're seeing recognition that we like to drink whiskey, and brands are going out of their way to help folks, find kosher bottles.
What inspired the book other than the fact that you know all these things?
Well, I mean, huh, I mean, I knew a lot before I started writing this book. Like my last book, I was the associate editor of the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, which is like a big encyclopedia, and Dave Wondrich, the editor in chief, and I got folks all around the world to write entries. But um, I thought I knew a lot when I started writing the Whiskey Bible. I realized obviously there's so much more to learn, and it's always such a humbling experience. Um, the project started out really with my publisher Workman. They had put out the Wine Bible about 20 years ago. Karen McNeil's pioneering an essential book. I still have my original copy that I got, probably around 2000. It's full of post-it notes, and I always sort of marveled at how Karen had done this. I thought it was incredible that she'd been able to put all this information between two covers, made it approachable, made it so that I didn't have to memorize all these things about the facts. It also convinced me that I should not write about wine because it's just so overwhelming, so much knowledge to know. So they approached me about 5+ years ago now, or about 5 years ago, to say, hey, like, would you be interested? We have the Wine Bible. We now have the Beer Bible, which came out a few years ago. Would you want to complete this trinity with the Whiskey Bible? And it blew me away that that they were offering this to me, but B, also like what that would entail and what an endeavor it would be. So I finally came to my senses fairly quickly and accepted, and that sent me down this crazy course to try to get all the whiskey knowledge in my head, but also just sort of all the whiskey knowledge in the world, into one book. I think we're reaching it's over 600 pages. I'm not sure how much more we could get in there without, going to 2 volumes or somehow figuring out some other kind of binding technique. But hopefully it's everything that you ever wondered about whiskey and more.
Got it. And what do you think then inspires somebody to pick up this book other than,
Yeah.
exercise, because obviously it's
Huh,
weightlifting,
huh,
right?
right.
You know,
Well, it's funny. I mean, like, in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, like nobody really wanted to drink whiskey or buy it, right? Like not just in America, but around the world. That like every year the number of whiskey drinkers decreased and the number of folks interested in vodka and gin and rum seemed to increase, and craft beer. So, we've gone from that to like, to a point where whiskey's not just like, a hobby or a drink or beverage. It's now like an obsession, right? It's a national obsession. I feel like it turns up. I mean, obviously, I'm particularly sensitive to seeing these things, but it seems to turn up in every TV show, movies, novels, newspaper articles. You know what I mean? There's constantly all these references to whiskey brands, to drinking whiskey, to cocktails, so that, so many people in America, I feel like we don't have that collective knowledge that people in, say, France or Italy or England or Scotland have about alcohol and whiskey, right? So I wanted folks to feel empowered and savvy. And, when they heard about something, whether it's from their colleague or their know-it-all friend, or they see a movie where somebody's drinking it, They could pull out the whiskey Bible, flip to that page, that section, like, oh, that's what they're talking about, right? And like that's, I think, fulfills people in a deeper way than just drinking, right? I mean, I love drinking whiskey and the flavors and the experience of having a drink, but there's also the fulfillment on other levels, right? That connection to the people who made it and the place where it was made and the story behind it and all of that stuff usually gets lost, right? For most people, they don't know anything about that. And sometimes that's the most fascinating thing about the whiskey. So I wanted people, while they're enjoying their dram, to be able to read about the back history and all that insider knowledge that they often don't get to experience.
That is so cool. And also there are recipes, right?
There are recipes. I mean, the book is so big, I feel like it ate other books, right? There's a full whiskey timeline of all types of whiskey from around the world, but there's also an appendix with 60 whiskey cocktail recipes. So 30 classic whiskey cocktails, like things like Manhattans, old fashions, to modern classics, right? Where you have all these fabulous bartenders around the country, around the world who are making cocktails today and all the top craft cocktail bars, and they were good enough to share their recipes with me and my readers. So, there's a whole, almost like a whole bonus whiskey cocktail book at the back of the whiskey Bible for folks that's annotated, with full recipes and directions and sub recipes and a little bit of a history of the recipe. And I think, it's sort of an amazing archive of, both classic whiskey drinking, but also modern, kind of whiskey bartending.
And if I asked you to play favorites,
Yeah.
do you have one or three?
Well, I mean, there's so many good recipes, right? And I think it's so much dictated by the day. But one of my favorite, I won't get myself in too much trouble. One of many, right? It's kind of choosing between children, I think, with the recipes. One of my favorites is a recipe called the Penicillin, by my friend Sam Ross. This is a cocktail that calls for two different types of scotch, both kind of more of the mellow blended scotch and then also the super smoky scotch, which you don't generally see in cocktails, but it's just a whisper. So you get that beautiful kind of peaty, smoky hit when you pick up the glass. It also calls for like a ginger syrup. Um, and what I love about Sam's cocktail is that it doesn't go back hundreds of years. He created it, at this point, less than 20 years ago, and it's kind of swept the world, and people all over the world now make this drink. But, it didn't take him very long to make. And I asked him about, like, where did the name come from? And he said that when he was smelling the cocktail, the different kind of notes from the whiskey and the honey ginger syrup and the citrus, that it reminded him of chicken soup, right? And that kind of whiff that you get sometimes depending upon the chicken soup that you make. And then he thought, because, even though he's from Australia, he made the drink when he was working in Manhattan, and he still does at Milk and Honey, the pioneering bar. It's obviously also a biblical reference. But when Sam was making the drink, um, he thought of the sort of chicken soup, and that, like any good New Yorker, made him think of the term Jewish penicillin, right? Which you often call chicken noodle soup for its supposed healing properties. I stand by that. I always stand that, if somebody is sick, that's the first thing that you offer them, right? After, I guess, Sudafed or aspirin and Tylenol, then it's, chicken noodle soup. So he thought of chicken noodle soup and the idea of like Jewish penicillin, and he shortened the name from Jewish penicillin to penicillin, which gives the drink this very sort of old-timey um, feel and sort of a gravitas. But I think it's hilarious that it came almost from a sort of insider joke in the fact that, the notes of the whiskey and the ginger syrup and the honey and the citrus all reminded Sam of chicken noodles.
I love that. I will say usually the chicken soup comes before the medicine, at least
Yes.
in my world.
Yeah.
What do you reach for? And if you go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to get the article that goes with the episode, you will also get the recipe or penicillin cocktail.
Yeah.
So what could be better? And I love ginger and a honey. Oh my goodness, they're like the best
Yeah.
flavors.
It's, and we're beginning to see those also used more and more in cocktails, right? Like, obviously, things like, dark and stormy, call for ginger beer and rum, or the Moscow Mule, which is very similar drink, which is vodka and again, ginger beer and lime juice. The dark and stormy also is lime juice. But you can also do that with whiskey. Like, you can make, either what's called the Mamie Taylor or Kentucky Buck, or just a simple highball if you don't want the citrus in it. But that combination of ginger ale, or even better, spicy, non-alcoholic ginger beer plus whiskey over ice is, I think, one of the world's greatest drinks. And few things taste better, especially on a hot afternoon or evening. And it's the type of drink that you can have, more than one of them, because it's sessionable given the alcohol level.
What is something that you want everybody, even like regular people like me,
Yeah.
to know about whiskey?
Well, it sounds silly, but I mean, I think most people don't know anything about whiskey. So everybody, or not everybody, but I think a lot of people have a complex that they think that they're the only person who doesn't know about whiskey, or they don't know about cocktails and spirits. And to be honest, giving talks around the country, if you're probably wondering about something, then everybody else is wondering about that too. And it might sound stupid, but I think that you should drink stuff that you enjoy, right? And you should drink it the way that you want. Like, it's not my job or the bartender's job or for your friends and relatives to tell you how you should drink, right? I mean, if you like whiskey and Diet Coke, enjoy it. You know what I mean? Like, own it. Like, that you feel free to drink it that way, right? Where I think people often are so worried that they're going to ruin their whiskey by adding things like ice or club soda or mixer, or that it's going to somehow explode in their face like a bad science experiment. And it's not. I mean, look, that will I order that drink? Maybe, maybe not. But like, if that's what you enjoy, then you should enjoy it, right? And if you want it on the rocks, have it on the rocks. You know what I mean? I think so often, for some reason, not about food, but about drinks, we're always very self-conscious that somebody's going to ask us, why did you order this? Like, why are you drinking this? And to be honest, the whiskey Bible should help, because you have plenty of tell people about why you like a certain product, right? There's plenty of interesting factoids to drop at cocktail parties and work functions and, your local watering hole. But B, I think, if somebody came up to you in a restaurant and said, why are you eating the chicken? You'd be like, what do you care why I'm eating chicken? You know what I mean? But we're all so worried that somebody's going to ask us at a bar, like, why are we drinking this? Right. And I think if people walk away from reading the Whiskey Bible or listening to our interview, is that they should feel empowered to drink what makes them happy, what they enjoy drinking, not what they think will impress me or you or the bartender or their boss or their mother-in-law or father-in-law. They should just drink what makes them happy. So, if anything, we should, as a society, we should own that and really take that to heart.
Everybody should own their love of whiskey as much
Yes.
as you own your love of
Yes.
whiskey. I feel so educated. What final food for thought do you want to leave people with?
Well, I think there's so many good whiskeys, right? And there's good news and bad news, right? The good news is that they're amazing whiskeys at all price points, right? You don't have to spend a fortune. I think that's a myth. Um, a lot of people think that, the older whiskey is, the better it is, or the more expensive it is going to be better, right? But those things like that you're paying for involve a lot of factors like evaporation and taxes and rarity and all of these things that, are totally legitimate, but may or may not actually have any effect upon whether or not you'll enjoy it more, right? So the good news is, like, you don't have to spend a fortune on whiskey. The bad news is that just because it's more expensive or older isn't like a shortcut to finding a whiskey that you'll enjoy more. So, I mean, the final takeaway is that there's nothing beats tasting, right? So, if you want to find whiskey that you love, you really have to go out and taste whiskey. And maybe that's going to a bar where you can get small pours, half ounce, or where they're willing to give you a little bit to let you taste it before you try it, or a liquor store, the same thing, where they sometimes have tasting events. But really, I think, you don't need to break the bank when it comes to buying whiskey. There are wonderful whiskeys that cost $20 a bottle. And there are wonderful whiskeys that cost $50,000 a bottle. And you may not love the $50,000 bottles more than you love the $20 bottles. So again, I mean, there's so many aspects of about why you might or might not like a whiskey. So, again, don't feel the pressure that you have to buy the most expensive whiskey. I think you should just try as many whiskeys as you possibly can.
Usually people get cooking homework. Today they're getting drinking homework.
Exactly. And all in moderation, that's the thing. This is, where it's tasting, right? And if you don't like it, you certainly shouldn't finish it. And, a little bit of whiskey goes a long way.
We've already covered the plain favorites, but is there something that you like better than the others, or you like to just drink the variety?
Like, you mean in terms of whiskey? Or, well, that question would have been a lot easier to answer probably 20 years ago, right? Because that's part of the reason why I like writing about whiskey and was that, unlike wine, you could taste all of the bourbons available, right? You could taste all the scotches that were available. There just weren't that many, right? There may be in all a couple dozen, that was it. But now you walk into a liquor store and there's like a wall of malt, right? I mean, there could be hundreds and hundreds of whiskeys, right? From all over the world, from places like, America and Canada, traditional powerhouses in Scotland, Japan, to Ireland, to now all types of places, including Israel, to India, to Mexico. So, I mean, it's a much harder question these days. But I mean, again, I sort of tend myself to drink a lot of, whiskey over other spirits. And sometimes it's, at this point, it's sometimes seasonal, sometimes it's, um, weather related. I think when it's cold and rainy or snowy, I reach for more of the peaty, smoky scotches, right? That sort of makes sense. Sometimes the lighter, more ethereal ones you want, in summer. But sometimes you want those heavier whiskeys and highballs too for hotter days, or to make things like mint juleps. So again, I mean, at this point, it's if anything, it's just such an embarrassment of riches, of so many different whiskeys that, um, so many wonderful distilleries, so many stories to read about. So I mean, that's there's hopefully the whiskey Bible will lead folks to try new things and discover new favorites.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Noah. Where can people learn more about you and the Whiskey Bible?
Well, thank you for having me on. I guess the easiest way is probably Instagram, where I'm Noah_Rothbaum. You can find me there. Check it fairly frequently. Always happy to answer people's questions or provide whiskey guidance.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Noah
Thank
Rothbaum,
you.
for sharing your love of whiskey and all things spirits. Thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and/or your favorite podcast platform. And if you go to jewishjournal.com/podcasts, you can get the recipes and read the articles that go with each episode. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Until next time, drink up and bon appetit.